Take a look at this gallery. There's nothing special about it. It doesn't look bad, but what if we wanted to level it up a notch and really make it interesting? This is exactly what we're going to do in this video. I'm going to show you how to take an ordinary gallery like this and integrate perspective and scale-based animations that are tied to the scroll position with the help of JavaScript and GreenSock. So let's get started. All right, so let's get started here. In the project files, you can go ahead and download this, and I'm going to real quickly go over the HTML. Some of the CSS I've already set up. We'll obviously be uncommenting one line over here, and then we'll also go ahead and work on the JavaScript. So real quickly, this HTML markup is very simple. We have an empty section at the top. We have this section here in the middle with an unordered list, which is where we have our gallery, where we have a list item. We have a div class and mask. Actually, I don't think I actually ended up using that mask element, but I can kind of show you how you could use that if I can remember. And then we just have the image right here, and these are all in the assets 1 through 12, and this is from Unsplash. And then right here in the section area, we're gonna get to this in a second, but just to quickly go over the CSS, which is Sass. Make sure you have the live browser extension and you're watching that. And then also you're watching the Sass as well. So I have this open on port. I'm not sure if you could see this. 5501. Okay, so those are two extensions you could install there. Live Sass compiler and the live server. And so if we look at what the project is currently, we have this empty section up here because each section element is 100 viewport height. And the reason I did this is because I want this to be like a scroll experience, so we need some space to scroll. We also have one at the bottom. And then we have just our 12 different images here with a display grid. And you know, in and of itself, if you want to leave it like this, that's completely fine, but we're trying to do things more interactively and more interesting. So let's go ahead and work on that. Now, the first thing that we're going to change is actually in the CSS, and there's a line that has been commented out. Transform perspective of 1000 pixels, rotate X of 35 degrees, and rotate Y of 15 degrees. So let's uncomment that, but then actually, let's just delete those last two lines. If we give this as perspective of like 1000 pixels, nothing changes. So in order to fix that, we have to actually have a rotate X and or a rotate Y. So if we just do a rotate X, you'll see what it does. It does this kind of cool effect where it's just kind of like falling down. You could play with the perspective value here. This is going to be more extreme the lower the value. So if we go from 1000 to 300, very extreme. So I think 1000 to be more subtle is perfectly fine. And then we can also rotate it on the Y axis as well, 15 degrees. So now we have this kind of cool, interesting effect, but we can make it even cooler if we animate each element based on the scroll position, and that's where JavaScript comes into play. So this is all we need for our CSS, nothing exciting there. And now let's go ahead and look at these scripts that we're importing via CDN. So the first thing I want to import is the Lenis smooth scroll. You don't need it for this effect at all, but for these type of interactive websites that I'm focusing on, smooth scroll is just so cool to be able to add. And so we're going to use Lenis. So I'm going to go ahead and uncomment that. And so our first line here is right here in Lenis. If you type in Lenis, L-E-N-I-S, smooth scroll in Google, you'll find the GitHub. It's from Studio Freight, which is one of the top design agencies. And there's also a video I created about how to use it as well. So when you uncomment that, you can also uncomment the code. This is the boilerplate code that's on their GitHub page for initiating the smooth scroll. So if I hit save right now, we can see now we have a nice smooth scroll. And if you want, you can tamper around with the settings and all that good stuff. Okay, so now that we have that, and by the way, we can comment smooth scroll stuff here. The next two lines are importing GreenSock animation platform, all right, right here, and also scroll trigger. So I like to use this CDN in order to get those links from you real quickly, which is if you just type GSAP3 CDN, the first result is CDN.js, and I just copy this middle script tag right here and also the scroll trigger plugin. Those are the two we're using. We're importing scroll trigger because we have to have the scroll trigger plugin when we're trying to do things based on scroll. Okay, So now that we have that out of the way, let's go ahead and tackle this in a methodical manner. What is the very first element that we need to gain access to, if you think about it? Well, if you think about it, it's going to be this section UL, okay? So once we have the section UL, we'll know exactly where this gallery begins, and we can use that as a target for the scroll trigger plugin. So let's go over here. We're going to type in const gallery equals document.query selector, and we could just say UL, or if you want to be specific, we'll say section UL in case you have another UL on the page, and that's good to go. Now, at this point in time, you could use the GreenSock animation platforms. I'll just call it GreenSock or GSAP for short from now on. You could use a timeline, but because this is pretty simple, we could just use simple tweens in the form of either from, to, or the from to method. So for us, we're just going to use to, and I'm going to show you right here what we're going to do. So GSAP to, let me zoom up just a bit while I type this. All right, we want to take our gallery, and we immediately want to utilize the scroll trigger plugin. So what we do is type scroll trigger. And by the way, those of you who are wondering where this code completion is coming from, that is GitHub Copilot. And it does a pretty good job sometimes. It's getting a lot of the stuff out already. So in this first object, when we're using scroll trigger, we're specifying the trigger element, which is going to be the target element that will precipitate any of the scroll magic, I guess you could say. So we're also going to specify scrub true. This means, and I'll make this false by the way so you can see what the difference is, but scrub true simply means that when you're scrolling down, the animation is tied to the scroll position, not time. If it's based on false for scrub, then it's going to be based on a time duration. So just to understand the difference between that, and you'll see in a second what that is. We also have to specify the start and end properties. I really did a good video about this recently about understanding start, end, and also toggle actions. So start, when do we want to start this scroll-based animation? All right, so this accepts two values. We have top, and basically you can mix values. Like you could do bottom, middle, top, top. We're just gonna do top, bottom, and we can also add an offset by putting minus equals 200 pixels. Oops, like that. All right, we're also gonna have an end, and we're gonna say bottom, middle, and then we're gonna say markers true. Now, when I say put markers true, and all this stuff right here, start and end, is probably pretty confusing to you. The reason we want to put markers true is so that it kind of shows you exactly what's happening over here. So if I move this off to the side so you can see it, you'll see these little areas that say scroller end, start, end, and then also scroller start. The location of these four pieces of elements, or these four labels essentially, is going to be based on what values you're specifying in your start, oops, sorry about that, in your start property and your end property. And when you really start to work with it and experiment with these values, you kind of understand the timing, because this is all about getting the timing correct with your start and end properties. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense, and you'll see, we'll play around with these values to really give it true context so you can see what they actually do. We're also going to put in toggle actions, and this is a property that allows you to specify 4 different parameters in a string. And so you can see on my GitHub Copilot, it's saying play none none reverse, which is actually what we want. But these 4 different values essentially allow you to control what this scroll trigger animations do based on when the target element or the trigger element comes into the viewport or leaves the viewport or comes back and leaves or leaves back, etc., etc. So again, it's a little bit confusing, but it gives you full control, way more control over like some solutions that are no code like Framer or Webflow. Okay, so let's hit save. In and of itself, this does absolutely nothing. except for just add these labels because we have true. So nothing changes yet from what we have. In order to actually animate stuff, we have to put in another parameter right here. So we'll put a comma, and then we can actually start animating whatever it is that we want to animate, okay? So what we could say is rotation X 0 degree. Okay, so what the heck is that? Well, if I go back here, we can see that we've specified a rotate X of 35 degrees. So we're going from 35, because we're using the to method, we're going to go to rotation X, but only based on the scroll trigger that we've defined. So if I go back, you'll see how it goes from 35 degrees to 0. And isn't that awesome in and of itself? So this could be a cool little effect, and you could really exaggerate it based on those values. So for instance, if you wanted to go to 65 degrees and we refresh, you'll see it's even more of an extreme sort of flow or animation. So what if we wanted each one of these images to kind of scale in or do something based on the scroll position? So we can create another one, and we can tie it to all of the image tags. So what I'll do, just to save a little bit of time, is I'll paste this. We're going to say img. That is going to grab every single image that exists on the web page. So if you wanted it, if you had other images you didn't want this applied to, you would give this a class or something, and that way you just choose these 2, or these 12 rather. This trigger is going to be gallery as well. So we want to animate the images based on the gallery position. So the trigger property stays the same between these 2 different tweens. We also are going to leave scrub true because we want to tie these to the actual scroll position. And again, we're going to experiment with that in a second by changing them to a false. The start is going to be exactly the same, but at the end we're going to put bottom minus equals 400 pixels. And again, I'll experiment with those as well because you might be confused if you haven't really saw those. Markers, I don't really need those, so we're just going to put false, and we're also going to take this and put false as well. And then play none on reverse, that's good. And then for the actual properties for animating these things, well, it's up to you. How do you think they should animate? I think we can go ahead and set scale to 1 because we're using the to method. And then we'll say stagger 0.3 in order to create a stagger animation where they come in sequentially and not all at once. So now notice we're saying scale to 1. Well, by default, it's already 1. So we want to hide those initially with gsap.set, take all the images, and we'll say scale 0. Let's save. Let's go back. Look at that. So if we take off stagger, for instance, let's just comment that out. You'll see they all come in at the same time. And at that point, it's really just a subjective preference. If you like this effect, that's fine. But if you want them to all come in at the same time, or not at the same time rather, but as an offset, then you could completely do that as well. So 0.3, what happens when we change this to 0.7? Okay, so it looks like it's even quicker. What if we change this to 0.1? All right, so they're a little bit more smooth. I personally like that better. All right, great. Now what happens if we change markers, or not markers rather, but we take scrub and we make those false? Here's what happens. Based on the scroll trigger, when it starts, the animation's just gonna start automatically, and it's gonna complete no matter what, based on the scroll position. So once we get up here, once we come over here, that's it. They're all gonna animate even though I'm not scrolling all the way down. And so this is kind of like a stylistic approach that you can use, or you could just tie it to the scroll position itself with scrub true. So I'm adding scrub true back, and look, see, they only are tied to that position. Now, when it comes to the timing of when these things animate in and out, again, like I said, that's based on these values, top, bottom, adding an offset if you wish. Let's say, for instance, we just did bottom, bottom on the image animations. Well, if I scroll down, they come in pretty fast. And that's fine. This actually is perfectly fine. In fact, I might even like that better. But if you wanted some more fine control over how long things last, I put 400 pixels here. You can adjust those values. So this one, it just makes it last a little bit longer. And that's that. And again, put markers true in order to see where your start and end values end up based on these offsets. So hopefully you enjoyed that. I have a lot more really interesting and more complex examples, especially coming up in the DesignCourse.com Advanced Frontends course, which is going to be releasing here in 2023. Make sure you enter your email to get notified when that releases. We'll be learning JavaScript fundamentals from the ground up with a free intro course. It's 2.5 hours long. That'll be releasing next month. And then the actual advanced front ends itself. That's where we start learning GreenSock from the absolute basics and learning a ton of different interactive examples. So hopefully you enter your email. You'll get notified when that releases. We're doing a pre-launch next month as well. You can grab it early and start taking it while the course is still in development. And yeah, I will stop talking now. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.